The look on Ryan Patterson's face when I walked into the main lodge conference room will stay with me forever. He had just finished his presentation to the Apex Marketing Solutions leadership team, smugly outlining his vision for the company's future, when I appeared in the doorway wearing the resort's signature burgundy blazer with the Aspen Ridge Resort logo embroidered in gold thread. The same logo that had been hanging above his head all weekend. His confident smile faltered as recognition dawned in his eyes. This was the woman he had left stranded at this very resort just 2 hours earlier. The woman he had publicly humiliated in front of the entire executive team before driving away in the company shuttle, leaving me with no transportation back to civilization. The woman he had dismissed as irrelevant to Apex's future. The woman who, 18 months ago, he had systematically pushed out of the company we had built together. What Ryan didn't know, what none of the 23 executives seated around the rustic pine conference table knew, was that Emma Martinez wasn't just another stranded employee. I was the owner of this entire resort. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning had started like any other company retreat. Aspen Ridge Resort sprawled across 200 acres of pristine Colorado mountain wilderness, its timber and stone buildings nestled among towering pines, with the snow-capped peaks of Vail visible in the distance. The November air carried the crisp promise of winter, and the resort's luxurious amenities provided the perfect backdrop for Apex Marketing Solutions' annual leadership retreat. I had arrived at the resort the night before, driving my own car up the winding mountain road while the rest of the executive team traveled together in the company-chartered bus. The separation felt symbolic of my current status within the organization I had helped create 3 years earlier. Once Ryan's equal partner in building Apex from a scrappy startup into Denver's premier marketing agency, I now found myself relegated to the periphery of leadership discussions, invited to events more out of obligation than genuine inclusion. The morning session had been predictably awkward. Ryan stood at the front of the conference room in his perfectly tailored navy suit, his dark hair styled with the kind of casual precision that suggested both careful grooming and studied nonchalance. At 34, he possessed the kind of confident charisma that had initially drawn me to him as a business partner, and briefly as something more personal. His presentation slides outlined Apex's expansion strategy, complete with aggressive growth projections and acquisition targets that made my stomach tighten with familiar anxiety. Seated in the back row, I watched him gesture enthusiastically at charts showing projected revenue increases of 40% year-over-year. The strategy was everything I had warned against during our increasingly tense executive meetings over the past 6 months. It relied on rapid expansion funded by dangerous levels of debt, the acquisition of smaller agencies whose cultures and capabilities we hadn't properly evaluated, and the pursuit of clients in markets where we had no proven expertise. Chelsea Morgan sat in the front row, her blonde hair catching the morning light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. As Ryan's assistant turned VP of Strategy, she had assumed many of the responsibilities that had once been mine. The promotion had been announced 6 months ago, coinciding with what Ryan had called a, quote, strategic restructuring that somehow managed to diminish my role while expanding hers. The timing hadn't been coincidental. During the break between morning sessions, I had attempted to voice my concerns about the expansion strategy to Jennifer Liu, one of the few board members who still seemed to value my input. We stood near the resort's massive stone fireplace, speaking in low tones, while other executives helped themselves to gourmet coffee and pastries from the catering station. The debt-to-equity ratio Ryan is proposing will leave us completely vulnerable if the market shifts, I explained, keeping my voice carefully neutral despite the frustration building inside me. We're talking about leveraging everything we've built for growth that may not be sustainable. Jennifer nodded thoughtfully, her expression reflecting the concern I felt. Have you discussed this with Ryan directly? The question stung because we both knew the answer. Ryan had made it increasingly clear that my input was no longer welcome in strategic discussions. The woman who had once been his equal partner in building Apex's reputation for innovative marketing solutions was now treated as an obstacle to his grander ambitions. I've tried, I admitted. But he's convinced that aggressive expansion is the only path forward. He sees my concerns as resistance to growth rather than prudent risk management. What I didn't tell Jennifer was how personal the professional dismissal had become. Ryan's relationship with Chelsea had been an open secret in the office for months, though he believed he was being discreet. The same confident charisma that had once been directed toward building our business partnership was now focused entirely on the young woman who reinforced his every strategic instinct rather than challenging them. The afternoon session had been even more uncomfortable. Ryan announced a major client presentation that would take place the following week, one that could secure Apex's largest contract to date. The presentation would be led by Chelsea, with support from the creative team and strategic input from the senior leadership. My name was conspicuously absent from the project team, despite my extensive experience with similar high-stakes presentations. When I quietly approached Ryan during another break to ask about my role in the presentation, his response was swift and cutting. "Emma, I think it's time you accepted that your approach to client relations doesn't align with where Apex is heading," he said, his voice carrying just enough volume for nearby colleagues to overhear. "This presentation requires a more aggressive, forward-thinking strategy. Chelsea has demonstrated exactly the kind of innovative thinking we need." The words landed like physical blows. In front of Marcus Thompson, one of my few remaining allies on the executive team, and Dr. Patricia Hayes, the retreat facilitator who had been hired to guide our leadership development sessions, Ryan had essentially declared me professionally obsolete. Marcus shifted uncomfortably, his loyalty to me evident in his expression, but his position too precarious to allow for public support. Dr. Hayes maintained her neutral facilitator demeanor, but I caught the slight tightening around her eyes that suggested she recognized the interpersonal dynamics at play. "I understand," I replied, my voice steady despite the humiliation burning in my chest. "I'll focus on other areas where my contributions might be more valuable." Ryan's smile was patronizing. "I'm sure you'll find your niche. Not everyone is cut out for the kind of high-level strategic thinking this expansion requires." The echo of similar dismissals over the past months rang in my ears as I returned to my seat. The woman who had once been instrumental in securing Apex's most important clients, who had developed the strategic frameworks that had guided our early success, was now being treated as a legacy employee whose time had passed. The final session of the day had been the most devastating. Ryan announced a comprehensive reorganization of Apex's leadership structure, ostensibly designed to support the company's aggressive growth strategy. Department heads would report directly to him, with Chelsea serving as his deputy for strategic initiatives. My role as Director of Strategic Development was being eliminated, replaced by a position as Senior Marketing Consultant, with significantly reduced responsibilities and no direct reports. This restructuring reflects our commitment to streamlined decision-making and unified strategic vision, Ryan explained to the room, his eyes avoiding mine as he spoke. "We need leadership that can move quickly and decisively in today's competitive market." The message was clear. Emma Martinez, co-founder of Apex Marketing Solutions, was being systematically removed from any position of meaningful influence within the company she had helped build. As the afternoon session concluded and executives began preparing for the evening's networking dinner, I found myself standing alone on the resort's expansive deck, looking out at the mountains that surrounded us. The November air was crisp enough to require a jacket, but I welcomed the cold as a counterpoint to the heat of shame and anger coursing through me. The sound of footsteps on the wooden decking drew my attention. Chelsea approached with the kind of confident stride that had become her signature since her promotion. She wore a cream-colored sweater that complemented her pale complexion and blonde hair, every detail of her appearance carefully curated to project competence and approachability. "Emma, I wanted to talk to you about the transition," she said, her voice carrying a tone of false concern that made my jaw tighten. "Ryan wanted me to assure you that your expertise will still be valued in your new role. We're just trying to create a more efficient organizational structure." The condescension in her voice was almost worse than Ryan's public dismissal. This woman, who had been hired as an administrative assistant just 2 years earlier, was now speaking to me as if I were a junior employee who needed reassurance about organizational changes. "I appreciate the clarification," I replied, keeping my voice neutral despite the storm of emotions building inside me. "I'm sure the new structure will serve Apex well." Chelsea's smile was bright and entirely without warmth. Ryan really believes this is the best path forward. He's been saying that sometimes the people who build a company aren't the same people who can scale it to the next level. Nothing personal, of course. Nothing personal. The phrase hung in the air between us like a challenge. Everything about this reorganization was personal. The systematic diminishment of my role, the elevation of the woman who had replaced me in Ryan's affections, the public humiliation disguised as strategic necessity. It was all devastatingly personal. Of course, I said simply, unwilling to give her the satisfaction of seeing how deeply her words had cut. As Chelsea walked away, presumably to report back to Ryan about our conversation, I remained on the deck watching the sun begin its descent behind the mountain peaks. The resort's staff moved efficiently through the lodge behind me, preparing for the evening's festivities. None of them knew that the woman standing alone on the deck was anything more than another corporate executive attending a company retreat. The networking dinner that evening was a masterclass in professional humiliation. Seated at a table far from the head table where Ryan held court with Chelsea at his side, I found myself relegated to conversations with junior staff members, who treated me with the polite deference reserved for executives whose influence was clearly waning. Ryan's speech to the assembled team was a celebration of Apex's bright future, full of references to the new energy and innovative thinking that would drive the company's next phase of growth. He thanked Chelsea specifically for her strategic vision and dedication to excellence, while my contributions to the company's founding and early success went unmentioned. The applause for Chelsea's recognition felt thunderous in my ears. I watched her stand and acknowledge the recognition with a gracious smile, her hand briefly touching Ryan's shoulder in a gesture that was subtle but unmistakably intimate. The message to everyone in the room was clear. Chelsea Morgan was Ryan's chosen successor, and Emma Martinez was a relic of the company's past. As the evening wound down and executives began retiring too, preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Their rooms, I found myself in the resort's elegant bar, nursing a glass of wine and trying to process the complete professional destruction I had just witnessed. The bar's rich wood paneling and soft lighting created an atmosphere of warmth and sophistication that contrasted sharply with the cold calculation of the evening's events. Marcus Thompson appeared at my elbow, his expression troubled. As one of the few executives who had been with Apex since its early days, he had witnessed the gradual erosion of my influence and the systematic elevation of Chelsea. His loyalty to me was genuine, but his position as head of client relations made open support politically dangerous. "Emma, I need to tell you something," he said quietly, glancing around to ensure we weren't overheard. "The restructuring isn't just about streamlining decision-making. Ryan's been systematically documenting every strategic disagreement you've had over the past year. He's building a case that your approach has been holding back the company's growth potential." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. The heated discussions about expansion strategy, the debates over client targeting, the concerns I had raised about financial risk. All of it had been carefully documented and framed as evidence of my inability to adapt to Apex's evolving needs. "He's rewriting our history," Marcus continued, his voice barely above a whisper, "making it seem like the company's success came despite your contributions rather than because of them. Some of the newer executives are starting to believe that narrative." I absorbed this information with a growing sense of clarity. Ryan's actions weren't impulsive or emotional. They were calculated moves designed to erase my influence and legitimize my removal from leadership. The personal betrayal was being disguised as necessary business strategy. "Thank you for telling me," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil in my chest. I needed to understand what I was really dealing with. Marcus nodded, his expression reflecting both sympathy and frustration at his own powerlessness to change the situation. "I'm sorry, Emma, you deserved better than this." After Marcus left, I remained in the bar for another hour, watching the fire crackle in the stone fireplace and trying to process the magnitude of what had occurred. The woman who had co-founded Apex Marketing Solutions, who had helped build it from a two-person startup into a thriving agency, was being systematically erased from the company's narrative and future. The next morning brought the final humiliation. As executives prepared for the journey back to Denver, Ryan made an announcement that would complete my professional destruction. Due to limited space in the company shuttle, there wouldn't be room for everyone to travel together. I would need to make alternative arrangements for my transportation back to the city. The announcement was delivered with the kind of casual authority that made it seem like a minor logistical inconvenience rather than a deliberate act of abandonment. Ryan's eyes met mine briefly as he spoke, and I saw in them the cold satisfaction of someone who believed he had won completely. "I'm sure Emma can handle the drive back to Denver," he said, his voice carrying just enough concern to maintain plausible deniability. "She's always been resourceful." The other executives avoided eye contact, their discomfort with the situation evident, but their unwillingness to challenge Ryan's decision equally clear. In the space of 48 hours, I had gone from company co-founder to someone who could be abandoned at a remote mountain resort without consequence. As the shuttle pulled away from Aspen Ridge Resort, carrying Ryan, Chelsea, and the rest of the Apex leadership team back to their comfortable lives in Denver, I stood in the lodge's grand entrance feeling the weight of complete professional isolation. The woman who had once been an equal partner in building the company was now someone who could be left behind without a second thought. What Ryan didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Emma Martinez had not been idle during the 18 months since being pushed out of meaningful leadership at Apex. The woman standing in the doorway of the resort lobby, watching the shuttle disappear around the mountain curves, was not the same person who had been betrayed and dismissed. She was someone who had spent every day since that betrayal preparing for exactly this moment. The resort manager, Maria Santos, approached me with a concerned expression. "Ms. Martinez, is everything all right? I saw the company shuttle leaving without you." I turned to face her, and for the first time in 48 hours, I allowed myself to smile. "Everything is exactly as it should be, Maria. In fact, I think it's time for the afternoon leadership meeting. Could you please ask the staff to prepare the conference room?" Maria's expression shifted from concern to understanding, a knowing smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Of course, Ms. Martinez. I'll have everything ready in 15 minutes. As she walked away to prepare for what would be the most important meeting of my life, I stood in the lodge's entrance and felt the weight of 18 months of careful planning settling into place. Ryan Patterson had just made his final mistake, and Emma Martinez was about to remind him exactly who he was dealing with. The afternoon sun streamed through the lodge's windows, casting long shadows across the polished wood floors. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear the shuttle's engine growing fainter as it carried my former colleagues back to their lives in Denver. They believed they were leaving behind a broken woman who had been systematically destroyed by superior strategy and stronger leadership. They had no idea they were about to discover the true cost of underestimating Emma Martinez. The conference room that had been the site of my professional humiliation just hours earlier was now being prepared for my resurrection. The same rustic pine table where Ryan had announced my relegation to irrelevance would soon become the setting for his own reckoning. The same windows that had provided a backdrop for Chelsea's recognition would frame the moment when the real power dynamics of this situation became clear. As I walked toward the conference room to prepare for the meeting that would change everything, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. 18 months of careful planning, strategic positioning, and patient execution had led to this afternoon at Aspen Ridge Resort. The woman who had been dismissed as irrelevant to Apex's future was about to demonstrate exactly how relevant she had become. The burgundy blazer I wore carried the resort's logo, but it represented something far more significant than employment. It was the symbol of ownership, of power, of the complete reversal of fortune that Ryan Patterson was about to experience. The man who had left me stranded at this resort was about to discover that he had made a fatal error in judgment. Emma Martinez was not stranded, she was home. 3 years earlier, Emma Martinez had been working as a senior marketing strategist at Morrison & Associates, one of Denver's established advertising agencies, when she first encountered Ryan Patterson at an industry conference in Las Vegas. The annual Digital Marketing Summit had drawn professionals from across the country, and Emma had been presenting on innovative approaches to brand storytelling when Ryan approached her after her session. He was magnetic in the way that successful salespeople often are, with an easy confidence that drew people into his orbit. Tall and lean with dark hair and striking blue eyes, Ryan possessed the kind of charisma that made conversations feel more important than they actually were. But what impressed Emma most during their initial discussion wasn't his charm. It was his genuine insight into the marketing industry's evolving landscape. "Your presentation on emotional narrative architecture was brilliant," he had told her over coffee in the hotel lobby, his enthusiasm seeming entirely authentic. "I've been saying for months that agencies are too focused on metrics and not enough on the human psychology behind consumer behavior. You articulated something I've been trying to put into words." Emma had been flattered by his attention, but more importantly, she had been intrigued by his strategic thinking. Ryan worked as a senior account executive at a boutique agency in Denver, and his perspective on client relationships revealed a sophistication that matched her own approach to campaign development. Their conversation had stretched through the afternoon and into the evening, covering everything from industry trends to personal philosophies about work and success. By the time the conference ended, they had exchanged contact information and made plans to continue their discussion back in Denver. What began as professional networking had evolved into something that felt like the beginning of a significant partnership, though neither of them had yet articulated what form that partnership might take. The months following the conference had been a period of intense collaboration disguised as casual professional interaction. Emma and Ryan met regularly for coffee, lunch, and evening drinks, ostensibly to discuss industry developments, but increasingly to share their frustrations with their respective employers and their ambitious visions for what marketing could become. Morrison and Associates had grown complacent, Emma explained during one of their meetings at a trendy downtown restaurant. The agency's established client base provided steady revenue, but the leadership had become risk-averse, unwilling to pursue the innovative approaches that could differentiate them in an increasingly competitive market. Her ideas for comprehensive brand transformation projects were consistently scaled back to safe, incremental improvements that satisfied clients without challenging them to think differently about their market positioning. Ryan's situation at his boutique agency was different, but equally frustrating. The small firm's resources were limited, preventing them from pursuing the kind of large-scale campaigns that could showcase their creative capabilities. Talented as the team was, they were constrained by budget limitations and a client base that preferred proven approaches over experimental strategies. "We're both stuck in situations that limit our potential," Ryan had observed during one of their evening conversations. "You have the strategic vision and creative capability. I have the client relationship skills and business development experience. Together, we could build something that neither of us could achieve alone." The idea of starting their own agency had been Ryan's suggestion, but Emma had immediately recognized its potential. They complemented each other perfectly. Her background in strategic planning and campaign development, balanced by his expertise in client acquisition and relationship management. More importantly, they shared a vision for what modern marketing could accomplish when freed from the constraints of traditional agency thinking. The decision to leave their respective positions and launch Apex Marketing Solutions had been mutual, but the execution had required careful planning. Emma had spent weeks developing comprehensive business plans, financial projections, and operational frameworks, while Ryan focused on identifying potential clients and securing initial funding. The division of responsibilities had felt natural, playing to their respective strengths, while ensuring that every aspect of the new venture received proper attention. Their first office had been a modest space in downtown Denver's Arts District, chosen for its creative atmosphere and affordable rent rather than its prestigious address. The exposed brick walls and industrial lighting had given Apex a startup authenticity that impressed potential clients while keeping overhead costs manageable. Emma had furnished the space with a combination of vintage pieces and modern technology, creating an environment that felt both professional and innovative. The early months had been exhilarating in their intensity. Emma and Ryan worked 16-hour days, often staying at the office until midnight to finish client presentations or refine campaign proposals. Their complementary skills had made them remarkably effective, Emma's strategic insights providing the foundation for campaign concepts that Ryan then developed into compelling client pitches. Their first major client had been a regional restaurant chain, looking to rebrand and expand into new markets. The project had perfectly showcased their collaborative approach. Emma's comprehensive market analysis and brand positioning strategy, combined with Ryan's relationship-building skills and persuasive presentation style. The campaign's success had not only secured their first significant revenue, but had also established Apex a reputation for innovative thinking and measurable results. The professional partnership had been thriving, but the personal relationship had been more complicated. The long hours and shared stress of building a business had created an intimacy that sometimes felt like more than professional collaboration. Emma had found herself attracted to Ryan's passion for their work and his unwavering confidence in their shared vision. The late-night strategy sessions had occasionally included personal conversations that revealed depths of ambition and vulnerability that made their connection feel profound. The romantic relationship had developed gradually, almost inevitably. After a particularly successful client presentation that had secured their second major account, Ryan had suggested they celebrate with dinner at one of Denver's most exclusive restaurants. The evening had been magical: good food, excellent wine, and the kind of animated conversation that made hours pass like minutes. When Ryan had walked her to her car afterward, the kiss had felt like the natural culmination of months of building attraction and mutual respect. For 6 months, their personal and professional lives had been seamlessly integrated. Emma had never been happier. The woman who had always been cautious about mixing business and romance had found in Ryan a partner who understood both her professional ambitions and her personal needs. They had worked together during the day with the kind of intuitive collaboration that made difficult projects feel effortless, then spent evenings planning their shared future both for Apex and for themselves. The relationship had enhanced rather than complicated their business partnership. Ryan's confidence in her abilities had pushed Emma to take creative risks she might have avoided alone, while her strategic thinking had helped him develop his natural relationship skills into sophisticated business development strategies. Their clients had responded positively to the obvious chemistry between them, viewing the partnership as evidence of Apex's cohesive vision and collaborative culture. By the end of their first year, Apex Marketing Solutions had grown from a 2-person startup to a team of 12 professionals operating out of a larger office space with an impressive client roster. Emma's role as Director of Strategic Development had evolved to encompass everything from high-level campaign planning to team leadership and client relationship management. Ryan, as Chief Executive Officer, had focused on business development and overall company vision, while maintaining his involvement in major client presentations. The success had been intoxicating, but it had also begun to create subtle tensions that Emma had initially attributed to the normal stresses of rapid growth. Ryan's confidence had gradually shifted from collaborative enthusiasm to something that felt more like possessiveness about the company's direction. During client meetings, he had begun presenting ideas that Emma had developed as his own insights, or crediting their joint work to his leadership rather than their partnership. The changes had been incremental enough that Emma had initially dismissed them as misunderstandings or the natural evolution of their respective roles. Ryan was the CEO after all, and it was appropriate for him to serve as the primary spokesperson for the company's vision. But the pattern had become more pronounced as Apex's reputation had grown and industry recognition had followed. When Apex had been featured in Denver Business Journal as one of the city's most promising young companies, the article had focused almost exclusively on Ryan's leadership and vision. Emma's contributions had been mentioned briefly, described as strategic support for Ryan's innovative approaches. The characterization had stung, but Ryan had assured her that journalists always preferred to simplify complex partnerships into single-leader narratives. "You know how important your contributions are to everything we've accomplished," he had told her over dinner at their favorite restaurant. "Media coverage doesn't reflect the reality of our partnership. What matters is that we both know the truth about what we've built together." Emma had accepted the explanation, but the incident had planted seeds of doubt that would grow stronger with each subsequent mischaracterization of her role in Apex's success. The woman who had developed the strategic frameworks that guided their most successful campaigns was increasingly being portrayed as Ryan's talented assistant rather than his equal partner. The hiring of Chelsea Morgan had initially seemed like a positive development. As Apex continued to grow, Ryan had needed administrative support to manage his increasing responsibilities as CEO. Chelsea had been recommended by a mutual contact, and her resume had shown impressive qualifications: a business degree from Colorado State University, experience in corporate communications, and glowing references from her previous employers. Emma had been involved in the interview process and had been impressed by Chelsea's intelligence and professionalism. The young woman had demonstrated excellent organizational skills and a genuine interest in the marketing industry that suggested she would be more than a typical administrative assistant. Her enthusiasm for learning and contributing to Apex's success had seemed authentic and refreshing. Chelsea's first months at Apex had been exemplary. She had quickly mastered the complex scheduling and communication requirements of Ryan's role, while also taking initiative to streamline office operations and improve client communication processes. Her efficiency had allowed Ryan to focus more time on strategic thinking and business development, which had translated into continued growth for the company. But Emma had begun to notice subtle changes in the office dynamics. Chelsea's role had gradually expanded beyond administrative support to include participation in strategic discussions and client meetings. Ryan had begun asking for her input on campaign development and business strategy, treating her insights with the kind of respect that suggested he viewed her as more than support staff. The expansion of Chelsea's responsibilities had coincided with what felt like a diminishment of Emma's influence on key decisions. Ryan had begun making unilateral choices about campaign directions and client strategies, consulting with Chelsea before discussing major changes with Emma. The collaborative decision-making process that had been the foundation of their partnership had been replaced by a more hierarchical approach with Ryan at the top, and Emma increasingly relegated to implementation rather than strategy. The first major crack in their relationship had appeared during a client presentation for a potential account that could have doubled Apex's revenue. Emma had spent weeks developing a comprehensive campaign strategy that represented some of her most innovative thinking, but when Ryan had presented the proposal to the client, he had credited the ideas to the collective creativity of the Apex team, rather than acknowledging her specific contributions. After the meeting, Emma had confronted Ryan about the mischaracterization, expecting him to understand her frustration and commit to more accurate representation of her role. Instead, his response had been defensive and dismissive. "Emma, we're building a company, not promoting individual egos," he had said in his office after the client had left. "Success belongs to the team, not to any single person. I thought you understood that." The response had been devastating not just for its content, but for its tone. Ryan had spoken to her as if she were a junior employee seeking undeserved recognition, rather than the co-founder of the company expressing legitimate concerns about proper credit for her work. The man who had once celebrated her strategic insights was now treating them as team contributions that belonged to the collective, rather than to her specifically. Emma had tried to explain that proper recognition wasn't about ego, but about professional integrity and the accurate representation of her contributions to potential clients and industry observers. But Ryan had remained unmoved, suggesting that her concerns about credit were preventing her from focusing on what really mattered: the continued growth and success of Apex Marketing Solutions. The conversation had ended with Emma feeling confused and hurt, uncertain whether she was being overly sensitive or whether Ryan's attitude represented a fundamental shift in how he viewed their partnership. The doubt had been reinforced by subsequent interactions, where her strategic contributions had been consistently minimized or attributed to collaborative team efforts rather than her individual expertise. The personal relationship had begun to deteriorate alongside the professional tensions. Ryan's behavior toward Emma had become increasingly distant and critical, as if he had begun to view her as an obstacle to his vision for the company, rather than an essential partner in achieving it. Their romantic relationship had gradually shifted from supportive partnership to something that felt more like professional tolerance punctuated by personal intimacy. Emma had initially attributed the changes to the stress of managing a rapidly growing company, but as months passed, she had begun to suspect that something more fundamental had shifted in Ryan's feelings toward her. The man who had once been her most enthusiastic supporter had become someone who seemed to view her contributions as limitations on his own leadership, rather than enhancements to their shared success. The discovery of Ryan's affair with Chelsea had been accidental but devastating. Emma had returned to the office late one evening to retrieve a client file, using her key to enter the building after hours. The lights in Ryan's office had been on, and she had approached to investigate, assuming he had simply forgotten to turn them off when leaving for the day. Instead, she had found Ryan and Chelsea in an intimate embrace, their professional relationship revealed as a facade that concealed a personal connection that had clearly been developing for months. The sight had been shocking not just for its betrayal of their romantic relationship, but for what it suggested about the professional changes she had been experiencing. Emma had retreated without being seen, driving home in a state of emotional numbness that had prevented her from processing the full implications of what she had witnessed. The woman who had built Apex Marketing Solutions alongside Ryan Patterson had discovered that her personal and professional partnerships had been systematically undermined by the very person she had trusted most completely. The confrontation had waited until the next morning, when Emma had arrived at the office early to find Ryan already at his desk, reviewing client presentations with the kind of focused attention that suggested he had no awareness of having been discovered. The normalcy of his behavior had been almost more disturbing than the betrayal itself. He had compartmentalized his deception so completely that he could maintain professional composure while systematically destroying their relationship. "We need to talk," Emma had said simply, closing his office door behind her. Ryan's expression had shifted from mild curiosity to guarded concern as he registered the seriousness of her tone. "Of course. What's on your mind?" "I know about you and Chelsea," Emma had said, her voice steady despite the turmoil beneath the surface. "I saw you together last night." The confession had transformed Ryan's expression from concern to something that looked almost like relief, as if maintaining the deception had become more burdensome than he had anticipated. He had leaned back in his chair, studying her with an assessment that felt clinical rather than emotional. "I suppose this conversation was inevitable," he had said finally. "I was hoping to handle the situation more gracefully, but circumstances have forced our hand." The casual tone had been devastating. Emma had expected anger, defensiveness, or at least guilt, but Ryan's response had been matter-of-fact, as if discussing a business decision rather than the destruction of their personal and professional relationship. "Handle the situation?" Emma had repeated, her voice rising despite her efforts to maintain composure. "Ryan, we built this company together. We built a life together. How long has this been going on?" Ryan had sighed, the sound suggesting impatience rather than regret. "Emma, we both know that what we had was convenient rather than sustainable. We worked well together in the beginning, but as the company has grown, our different approaches to leadership have become increasingly incompatible. Chelsea understands my vision for Apex's future in ways that, frankly, you never have." The words had landed like physical blows, each one designed to minimize their shared history and reframe their partnership as a temporary arrangement that had outlived its usefulness. The man who had once told her she was essential to his success was now suggesting that she had been a convenient placeholder until someone better suited to his needs had arrived. Different approaches to leadership? Emma had challenged, her professional pride overriding her personal pain. "Ryan, every major strategic framework we use came from my analysis and planning. Every successful campaign we've launched has been built on research and positioning strategies that I developed. How is recognizing my contributions incompatible with your vision?" Ryan's expression had hardened, revealing something cold and calculating beneath his familiar charm. "That's exactly the problem, Emma. You're too focused on individual recognition and not enough on collective success. Chelsea understands that great leaders delegate credit while taking responsibility for results. She's team-oriented in ways that you've never been able to achieve." The accusation had been breathtaking in its dishonesty. Emma had never sought individual recognition at the expense of team success. She had simply wanted accurate acknowledgement of her contributions to the company they had built together. The strategic frameworks, campaign innovations, and client relationship approaches that had made Apex successful had been her creations, and she had deserved professional credit for that work. But Ryan had already moved beyond their personal relationship to what he clearly viewed as the more important business implications of his decision. The conversation had shifted from acknowledgement of betrayal to discussion of Emma's future role at Apex, as if her romantic relationship with him had been secondary to her professional utility. "I think it would be best if we restructured your role to focus on areas where your contributions can be most valuable," Ryan had continued, his tone becoming more businesslike. "We're bringing in new leadership for strategic development, and I think you'd be most effective in a more specialized position." The proposal had been devastating in its implications. Emma was being removed from strategic leadership at the company she had co-founded, replaced by the woman who had been sleeping with her business partner. The restructuring was being presented as a logical business decision rather than the personal betrayal it clearly represented. "You're firing me," Emma had said, the reality of her situation finally becoming clear. "I'm reorganizing the company to maximize everyone's strengths," Ryan had corrected. "Your expertise in market analysis and campaign development will still be valuable, just in a more focused capacity. Chelsea will be handling strategic oversight and client relationship management going forward." The euphemistic language had been designed to minimize the brutality of what was occurring, but Emma had recognized the truth beneath Ryan's carefully chosen words. She was being systematically removed from leadership at Apex Marketing Solutions, her role diminished to make room for the woman who had replaced her in Ryan's personal life. The months that followed had been a masterclass in professional humiliation. Emma's responsibilities had been gradually transferred to Chelsea, who had been promoted to Vice President of Strategic Development with a salary that exceeded Emma's despite having a fraction of her experience and none of her track record of success. The strategic frameworks Emma had developed had been credited to collaborative team efforts, while new initiatives had been attributed to Chelsea's innovative thinking. Client relationships that Emma had cultivated over years had been systematically transferred to Chelsea's oversight, with Ryan explaining to clients that the change reflected Apex's commitment to fresh perspectives and innovative approaches. The woman who had originally developed the client acquisition strategies that had built Apex's reputation was now being portrayed as someone whose outdated methods were being replaced by more modern approaches. The psychological impact had been as devastating as the professional consequences. Emma had watched her life's work being systematically attributed to others, while her own contributions were minimized or erased entirely. The company she had helped build from nothing was being transformed into something that no longer had room for her leadership or even her meaningful participation. The final humiliation had come during a company meeting where Ryan had announced Apex's expansion into new markets and service areas. The strategic plan he had presented had been based entirely on research and analysis that Emma had conducted, but his presentation had credited the innovative thinking to Chelsea's leadership and vision. Emma's name had not been mentioned once during the presentation, despite the fact that every major component of the expansion strategy had originated from her work. After the meeting, Emma had confronted Ryan one final time, hoping to salvage some remnant of their professional relationship, if not their personal one. The conversation had taken place in his office, with Chelsea present as his newly appointed strategic advisor. "Ryan, the expansion strategy you presented today was based on my market analysis and competitive research," Emma had said, trying to keep her voice professional despite the anger building inside her. "I think there's been a misunderstanding about the source of those strategic insights." Ryan's response had been swift and cutting. "Emma, I think you're having trouble accepting that the company has evolved beyond your original contributions. The strategic thinking behind our expansion reflects the collective intelligence of our team, not any individual's work. Chelsea has been instrumental in synthesizing various inputs into a coherent vision for our future." The dismissal had been complete and final. Emma's contributions to Apex Marketing Solutions had been officially erased, her role in the company's success rewritten to accommodate the narrative that Ryan and Chelsea were building together. The woman who had co-founded the company was now being treated as a legacy employee, whose time had passed. The decision to leave Apex had been inevitable, but the terms of Emma's departure had been dictated entirely by Ryan's agenda. The separation agreement had been designed to minimize her future influence while protecting the company from any legal challenges to the narrative Ryan was constructing. Emma's shares in the company had been bought out at a fraction of their true value, justified by complex valuation methodologies that minimized the worth of her contributions. The non-compete clause had been particularly devastating, preventing Emma from working in the marketing industry for 18 months and effectively ending her ability to pursue the career she had spent years building. Ryan had insisted that the restriction was necessary to protect Apex's intellectual property and client relationships, but Emma had recognized it as insurance against her ability to expose the true source of the company's strategic innovations. The final meeting had taken place in Apex's conference room, the same space where Emma had once presented her most innovative campaign concepts and strategic insights. Ryan had been accompanied by Chelsea and the company's attorney, while Emma had sat alone, signing documents that formally ended her association with the company she had helped create. "I want you to know that I genuinely appreciate everything you contributed to Apex's early success," Ryan had said as Emma prepared to leave the office for the final time. "Your work during our startup phase was valuable, and I hope you find opportunities that are better suited to your particular strengths." The condescending tone had been unbearable, but Emma had maintained her composure, unwilling to give him the satisfaction of seeing her break down. She had gathered her personal belongings, a small box of items that represented 3 years of her professional life, and walked out of Apex Marketing Solutions with her head held high. The woman who had co-founded one of Denver's most successful marketing agencies had been reduced to a footnote in the company's history, her contributions erased, and her future constrained by the very person she had trusted most completely. But as Emma had driven away from the office that final time, she had made a silent promise to herself. This was not the end of her story, but rather the beginning of a new chapter that Ryan Patterson would come to regret having written. The weeks following Emma's departure from Apex Marketing Solutions passed in a haze of professional limbo and personal devastation. The non-compete clause that Ryan had insisted upon created a legal prison that extended far beyond the 18-month restriction on working in the marketing industry. Emma discovered that the agreement's language was broad enough to prevent her from consulting for any company that might compete with Apex's services, effectively eliminating most opportunities to use her professional skills. The apartment Emma had shared with Ryan became unbearable in its emptiness. Every corner held memories of their shared dreams and collaborative planning sessions. The home office, where they had worked late into the night developing strategies for their fledgling company, now felt like a monument to her naivete. The woman who had once believed in the power of partnership and mutual respect had learned a devastating lesson about the fragility of both professional and personal trust. Emma's daily routine had been structured around the demands of building and managing Apex. Without that framework, she found herself adrift in a way that felt both liberating and terrifying. The alarm clock that had once summoned her to urgent client meetings and strategic planning sessions now rang into silence. The phone that had constantly buzzed with opportunities and challenges remained stubbornly quiet. The professional identity she had spent years building had been systematically dismantled, leaving her uncertain about who she was without the company she had helped create. The financial implications of her departure gradually became clear as Emma reviewed her resources and obligations. The buyout of her Apex shares had provided a modest cushion, but the amount was far less than the true value of her contributions to the company's success. Ryan's valuation methodology had been designed to minimize her compensation while providing legal protection against future claims. The woman who had helped build a company worth millions had been compensated as if she were a departing employee rather than a co-founder. The isolation was perhaps the most difficult aspect of her new reality. The professional network Emma had cultivated over years of industry involvement had been effectively compromised by her departure from Apex. Former colleagues and industry contacts treated her with the polite distance reserved for someone whose career had clearly suffered a setback. The narrative that Ryan and Chelsea were carefully constructing portrayed Emma as someone who had been unable to adapt to the demands of a growing company, making her a professional liability rather than a valuable connection. Marcus Thompson remained one of the few people willing to maintain contact, though even his support came with obvious limitations. His position at Apex made open assistance politically dangerous, but he provided Emma with carefully worded updates on the company's direction and the changes being implemented under Chelsea's leadership. The information was both helpful and painful, confirming that her strategic frameworks were being implemented while her contributions were being systematically erased from the company's narrative. "They're using your client acquisition model for the new business development initiative," Marcus told her during one of their infrequent coffee meetings at a location far from Apex's offices. Chelsea presented it as her own innovation, and Ryan backed up the claim. The team knows where it really came from, but no one's willing to speak up. The revelation had been devastating, but not surprising. Emma's intellectual property was being appropriated by the very people who had pushed her out of the company, while she remained legally constrained from using her own innovations to compete or even to build a new career. The injustice was complete and seemingly irreversible. The lowest point had come during a chance encounter at a Denver industry networking event that Emma had attended in a desperate attempt to maintain some connection to her professional field. The event had been poorly timed, occurring just weeks after her departure from Apex when the wound was still fresh and her confidence was at its lowest ebb. Emma had hoped to quietly reconnect with former colleagues and perhaps explore opportunities that wouldn't violate her non-compete agreement. Instead, she had found herself the subject of uncomfortable conversations and pitying glances from people who had once sought her strategic advice. The industry gossip had clearly painted her as someone who had been unable to keep pace with the demands of a successful agency, making her a cautionary tale rather than a respected professional. The encounter with David Walsh, a senior executive at one of Denver's largest marketing firms, had been particularly humiliating. David had approached Emma with the kind of careful sympathy reserved for someone who had suffered a public professional failure. "Emma, I heard about your departure from Apex," he had said, his tone suggesting he was offering condolences rather than professional greetings. "I'm sure it was a difficult decision, but sometimes these transitions work out for the best. Have you given any thought to what you might want to do next?" The question had been well-intentioned but devastating in its implications. David was speaking to her as if she had voluntarily left her position rather than being systematically pushed out. The narrative that Ryan and Chelsea were constructing had been so effective that even industry insiders believed Emma had chosen to step away from the company she had helped build. "I'm exploring various opportunities," Emma had replied, trying to maintain professional composure despite the humiliation burning in her chest. "The non-compete agreement limits my options in the immediate term, but I'm optimistic about the future." David had nodded sympathetically, but his expression had suggested he viewed her situation as a professional dead end rather than a temporary setback. The conversation had ended with polite wishes for her success and a business card that both of them knew would never be used. Emma had left the event feeling more isolated and professionally damaged than ever before. The drive home from the networking event had been a turning point, though Emma wouldn't recognize it as such until much later. Sitting in her car in the parking lot of her apartment complex, she had finally allowed herself to fully process the magnitude of what had been done to her. The woman who had co-founded Apex Marketing Solutions had been professionally erased, her contributions stolen, her future constrained, and her reputation systematically destroyed. The tears that came were not just for the loss of her company or her relationship with Ryan, but for the recognition that her fundamental assumptions about fairness and justice had been naive. She had believed that competence and integrity would be rewarded, that partnerships based on mutual respect would endure, and that truth would ultimately prevail over manipulation and deceit. The destruction of these beliefs was perhaps more devastating than any financial or professional loss. But something else had emerged from that moment of complete despair, a clarity that had been obscured by months of confusion and self-doubt. Emma had finally understood that her situation was not the result of her own inadequacy or inability to adapt to changing circumstances. She had been systematically betrayed by someone she had trusted completely, and the professional destruction that followed had been calculated and deliberate. The recognition had been liberating in its awful completeness. Emma was not responsible for Ryan's betrayal or Chelsea's opportunism. She was not at fault for trusting someone who had proven unworthy of that trust. The strategic frameworks and innovative thinking that had made Apex successful were hers, regardless of who was currently claiming credit for them. The skills and insights that had built one successful company could be used to build another, once she was free from the legal constraints that currently bound her. The decision to leave Denver had been immediate and absolute. The city held too many memories and too many professional connections who had accepted the narrative of her failure. Emma needed physical distance from the site of her betrayal and the space to rebuild her identity without the constant reminder of what had been taken from her. More importantly, she needed to position herself in a market where she could develop new capabilities and resources without the shadow of her past relationship with Ryan. Austin, Texas had emerged as the logical destination through a combination of practical considerations and strategic opportunity. The city's thriving technology sector created demand for sophisticated marketing services, while its startup culture valued innovation and strategic thinking over established relationships and traditional credentials. The cost of living was manageable, the professional environment was dynamic, and the distance from Denver provided the psychological separation Emma needed to begin her transformation. The move had been accomplished with surgical efficiency. Emma had sold her furniture, terminated her lease, and packed her remaining possessions into a rented truck within 2 weeks of making the decision. The physical act of dismantling her life in Denver had been cathartic, each discarded item representing another tie to the past being severed. The woman who had driven away from Denver had carried with her only the essentials: her clothes, her laptop, and the determination to rebuild her professional life on her own terms. The first months in Austin had been devoted to practical necessities and strategic planning. Emma had rented a small apartment in a complex that catered to young professionals, choosing anonymity over luxury while she developed her long-term plans. The modest space was furnished with careful attention to creating an environment that would support focused work and strategic thinking. The home office she established was spare but functional, designed to facilitate the kind of intensive analysis and planning that would be required for her eventual return to the business world. The non-compete agreement remained a significant constraint, but Emma had begun to recognize it as an opportunity rather than merely a limitation. The 18 months of enforced exile from the marketing industry would provide time to develop new skills and explore adjacent fields that could enhance her eventual return to strategic work. The restriction on marketing services didn't prevent her from studying finance, investment strategies, or business development approaches that could expand her professional capabilities. Emma had enrolled in online courses covering investment analysis, mergers and acquisitions, and strategic finance. The coursework was demanding but exhilarating, providing intellectual challenges that had been absent from her life since leaving Apex. The analytical skills she had developed in marketing strategy proved readily transferable to financial analysis, while her experience in business development provided context for understanding corporate transactions and investment opportunities. The transformation was not merely professional, but personal as well. The woman who had once defined herself in relationship to Ryan Patterson and their shared company began to develop an identity that was entirely independent of her past associations. The process was painful but ultimately liberating, forcing Emma to confront aspects of her character and capabilities that had been overshadowed by her role as Ryan's partner. The isolation that had initially felt like punishment gradually became a source of strength. Emma had never before had the opportunity to pursue her own intellectual interests without the pressure of immediate business applications or the need to coordinate with a partner's different priorities. The freedom to explore ideas and develop capabilities purely for her own advancement was intoxicating in its potential. The research that began as general education gradually focused on specific industries and opportunities that might provide the foundation for Emma's eventual return to business leadership. The hospitality industry emerged as particularly interesting, combining the strategic thinking and customer relationship management skills she had developed in marketing with the financial complexity and operational challenges that appealed to her growing interest in business development. The discovery of investment opportunities in mountain resort properties had been accidental but immediately compelling. Emma had been researching commercial real estate markets when she encountered a case study of a successful resort acquisition and turnaround. The analysis had revealed the sophisticated strategic thinking required to evaluate hospitality properties, the importance of location and market positioning, and the potential for substantial returns when operations were properly managed. The research had gradually expanded to encompass the entire resort industry, with particular attention to properties in Colorado's mountain regions. Emma had studied market trends, seasonal patterns, and the financial structures that supported successful resort operations. The work was complex and demanding, requiring her to master new analytical frameworks while applying her existing strategic thinking to unfamiliar business models. The focus on Colorado properties had been driven by both practical considerations and a growing sense of poetic justice. The state's resort industry offered excellent investment opportunities for someone with the right combination of analytical skills and strategic vision. More importantly, the concentration of corporate retreat facilities in Colorado's mountain regions created opportunities for someone who understood both the hospitality industry and the corporate market that provided much of its revenue. Emma's investigation of Aspen Ridge Resort had begun as academic research, but had gradually evolved into something more personal and strategic. The property's location in Vail provided access to corporate clients from Denver, while offering the kind of luxury amenities that sophisticated companies expected for their executive retreats. The resort's financial performance had been steady but unspectacular, suggesting opportunities for improvement through better strategic management and enhanced service offerings. The deeper Emma had researched Aspen Ridge Resort, the more convinced she had become that the property represented exactly the kind of opportunity she had been seeking. The resort's current ownership was a small investment group that had acquired the property during a distressed sale, but lacked the hospitality expertise to maximize its potential. The facility was well maintained but underutilized, operating at occupancy rates that suggested either poor marketing or inadequate strategic positioning. The financial analysis had been complex, but ultimately encouraging. Emma's studies in investment strategy and mergers and acquisitions had provided the tools to evaluate the resort's true value and identify the operational improvements that could justify a higher purchase price. The property's cash flow was sufficient to support acquisition financing, while the potential for improved performance offered the possibility of substantial returns on investment. The decision to pursue the acquisition had been motivated by both financial opportunity and strategic positioning. Aspen Ridge Resort represented a sound investment that could provide the foundation for Emma's return to business leadership. More importantly, the resort's location and client base created opportunities for encounters with the corporate world that had rejected her, including the possibility of hosting retreat events for companies like Apex Marketing Solutions. The acquisition process had required Emma to develop new capabilities in negotiation, due diligence, and project financing. The work was challenging but exhilarating, providing proof that her strategic thinking and analytical skills were not limited to marketing applications. The woman who had once been dismissed as lacking business acumen was successfully completing a complex commercial real estate transaction that would have challenged experienced investors. The financing had been the most difficult aspect of the acquisition, requiring Emma to leverage her limited resources while securing sufficient capital to complete the purchase. The solution had emerged through a combination of personal investment, traditional commercial lending, and a strategic partnership with Robert Chen, a veteran hospitality investor who had been impressed by Emma's analytical approach and strategic vision. Robert's involvement had been crucial not just for the additional capital he provided, but for the validation his experience offered. The man who had successfully acquired and managed resort properties across the western United States had recognized in Emma the kind of strategic thinking and operational focus that characterized successful hospitality investments. His willingness to partner with her had provided both financial resources and professional credibility that would be essential for the resort's future development. The closing had taken place on a crisp October morning in the offices of a Denver law firm, with Emma sitting across from the resort's previous owners and their representatives. The signing of the final documents had been both a professional achievement and a personal milestone. The woman who had been forced out of her own company 18 months earlier had just become the owner of a 200-acre mountain resort valued at several $million. The drive to Aspen Ridge Resort for her first visit as the new owner had been emotional in ways Emma hadn't anticipated. The winding mountain roads and spectacular scenery had provided a stark contrast to the urban environment where she had built and lost her previous company. The property's natural beauty and peaceful setting had offered a sense of possibility and renewal that felt like a rebirth after the professional destruction she had endured. The resort itself had exceeded even Emma's detailed research and analysis. The main lodge was a masterpiece of mountain architecture, combining rustic elegance with modern amenities in a way that created immediate emotional connection. The conference facilities were sophisticated and well-equipped, capable of hosting corporate retreats for companies of any size. The guest accommodations were luxurious without being ostentatious, providing the kind of comfortable sophistication that corporate executives expected. The staff had been professional and welcoming, clearly eager to impress their new owner and demonstrate their commitment to the resort's success. Maria Santos, the resort manager, had provided a comprehensive overview of operations, financial performance, and opportunities for improvement. The presentation had confirmed Emma's analysis while revealing additional potential that her research had not fully captured. The months that followed had been devoted to operational improvements and strategic repositioning that would maximize the resort's potential. Emma had applied the same analytical rigor and strategic thinking that had made Apex Marketing Solutions successful. But now she was building something that belonged entirely to her. The sense of ownership and control was intoxicating after the powerlessness she had experienced during her final months at Apex. The resort's marketing strategy had been completely reimagined, with Emma drawing on her extensive experience in brand positioning and customer relationship management. The property's unique combination of natural beauty, luxury amenities, and proximity to Denver made it ideal for corporate retreats, but the previous ownership had never fully exploited these competitive advantages. Under Emma's leadership, Aspen Ridge Resort had been repositioned as the premier destination for executive retreats and strategic planning sessions. The operational improvements had been systematic and comprehensive. Emma had upgraded the conference facilities with state-of-the-art technology, enhanced the catering services to offer more sophisticated dining options, and improved the guest accommodations to meet the expectations of discerning corporate clients. The changes had been expensive but strategically sound, positioning the resort to command premium pricing while delivering exceptional client experiences. The most satisfying aspect of the transformation had been the response from corporate clients. Companies that had previously held retreats at competing properties had been impressed by the improvements at Aspen Ridge Resort and had begun booking their annual events at the facility. The resort's reputation for excellence had grown through word-of-mouth recommendations and industry recognition, creating a virtuous cycle of increasing demand and higher occupancy rates. The financial performance had exceeded Emma's projections, with the resort operating at near capacity during peak seasons and maintaining strong occupancy rates throughout the year. The combination of improved operations, enhanced amenities, and strategic marketing had transformed Aspen Ridge Resort from an underperforming property into one of Colorado's most successful corporate retreat destinations. The success had been personally vindicating as well as financially rewarding. Emma had demonstrated that her strategic thinking and business acumen were not limited to marketing applications, but could be successfully applied to any industry that required analytical rigor and operational excellence. The woman who had been dismissed as lacking business sophistication had built a thriving hospitality business that consistently outperformed its competitors. The irony of the situation had not been lost on Emma. The same strategic thinking that Ryan had dismissed as overly cautious had been applied to build a business that was more successful and sustainable than the aggressive expansion strategy he had pursued at Apex. The careful analysis and risk management that Chelsea had characterized as obstacles to growth had been the foundation for creating genuine value in an industry that rewarded operational excellence over flashy marketing claims. The transformation had been complete by the time Emma received the inquiry about hosting Apex Marketing Solutions' annual retreat. The request had come through the resort's standard booking process, with no indication that the person making the inquiry was aware of Emma's connection to the company. The irony was perfect. Ryan Patterson was seeking to hold his company's leadership retreat at a property owned by the woman he had betrayed and dismissed. Emma's response had been immediate and calculated. She had accepted the booking enthusiastically, offering premium services and accommodations that would ensure the retreat would be memorable for all the right reasons. The woman who had once been stranded by Ryan's callous abandonment was now in a position to demonstrate exactly how much he had underestimated her capabilities and determination. The preparation for Apex's retreat had been meticulous, with Emma working closely with Maria Santos to ensure every detail would exceed the company's expectations. The conference facilities had been configured to provide the perfect setting for strategic discussions and team-building activities. The catering had been planned to showcase the resort's culinary capabilities while accommodating the dietary preferences of the executive team. The guest accommodations had been prepared to the highest standards, ensuring that every member of the leadership team would experience the luxury and comfort that had made Aspen Ridge Resort famous. The most important preparation had been psychological and strategic. Emma had spent months anticipating this moment, developing the perfect response to the inevitable confrontation with Ryan and Chelsea. The woman who had once been devastated by their betrayal was now completely prepared to demonstrate the consequences of underestimating her resilience and determination. The burgundy blazer with the Aspen Ridge Resort logo had been chosen specifically for its symbolic value. The garment represented not just her role as the resort's owner, but her complete transformation from victim to victor. The woman who had once been dismissed as irrelevant to the future of business leadership was now the owner of the very property where that dismissal would be revealed as a catastrophic miscalculation. As Emma had prepared for the confrontation that would complete her transformation from betrayed partner to triumphant entrepreneur, she had reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The 18 months of enforced exile from the marketing industry had been the most difficult period of her life, but they had also been the most transformative. The woman who had once defined herself in relationship to Ryan Patterson and their shared company had emerged as someone entirely independent and infinitely more powerful. The success of Aspen Ridge Resort under her leadership had provided more than financial security and professional vindication. It had demonstrated that Emma Martinez was not just a talented marketing strategist, but a sophisticated business leader capable of succeeding in any industry that rewarded strategic thinking and operational excellence. The skills that had made Apex Marketing Solutions successful were hers, not Ryan's, and they had been applied to create something far more substantial and enduring than the company that had been taken from her. The moment of confrontation was approaching, and Emma was ready. The woman who had once been stranded at this very resort was now its owner, prepared to demonstrate to Ryan Patterson and everyone else exactly what they had lost when they had chosen to betray her trust and dismiss her contributions. The transformation was complete, and the reckoning was about to begin. The months following Emma's acquisition of Aspen Ridge Resort had been a masterclass in strategic patience and systematic execution. While Ryan Patterson celebrated what he believed was his complete victory over his former partner, Emma was methodically building something far more powerful than anything they had created together at Apex Marketing Solutions. The woman he had dismissed as lacking business sophistication was transforming a struggling mountain property into Colorado's premier corporate retreat destination. Emma's approach to developing the resort had been fundamentally different from Ryan's aggressive expansion strategy at Apex. Instead of pursuing rapid growth at any cost, she had focused on operational excellence and sustainable competitive advantages. Every improvement to the property had been carefully planned and executed, with particular attention to creating the kind of exceptional client experiences that would generate word-of-mouth recommendations and repeat bookings. The conference facilities had been Emma's first priority, recognizing that corporate retreats represented the most lucrative and consistent revenue stream for the property. The main meeting rooms had been equipped with cutting-edge presentation technology, comfortable seating arrangements that facilitated both formal presentations and collaborative discussions, and lighting systems that could be adjusted to create the perfect atmosphere for any type of business gathering. The enhancement of the resort's dining capabilities had been equally important to Emma's strategic vision. Corporate executives expected sophisticated cuisine that would impress their colleagues and clients, not the standard conference center fare that many competing properties offered. Emma had recruited a chef with extensive experience in high-end corporate catering, someone who understood that business meals were as much about relationship building and impression management as they were about nutrition. The guest accommodations had been upgraded to reflect the luxury standards that successful executives expected from their professional travel experiences. Each room had been individually designed to combine mountain elegance with modern amenities, creating spaces that felt both restful and sophisticated. The suites had been configured with separate sitting areas that could accommodate private meetings or quiet work sessions, recognizing that corporate retreats often required a blend of group activities and individual productivity. The most innovative aspect of Emma's transformation of Aspen Ridge Resort had been the integration of team building and strategic planning services directly into the property's offerings. Rather than simply providing meeting spaces and hoping clients would arrange their own activities, Emma had developed comprehensive retreat packages that included facilitated leadership development sessions, strategic planning workshops, and team-building exercises specifically designed for corporate groups. The development of these specialized services had required Emma to draw on her extensive experience in organizational development and strategic thinking. She had created structured programs that helped companies clarify their vision, improve their decision-making processes, and strengthen their leadership capabilities. The offerings were sophisticated enough to appeal to Fortune 500 companies, while remaining accessible to smaller organizations seeking to enhance their competitive positioning. The marketing strategy for the enhanced resort had been Emma's opportunity to demonstrate the full extent of her strategic capabilities. She had developed a comprehensive brand positioning that emphasized Aspen Ridge Resort's unique combination of natural beauty, luxury amenities, and business-focused services. The marketing materials had been designed to appeal specifically to executive assistants and event planners, who were responsible for organizing corporate retreats, emphasizing the property's ability to deliver exceptional experiences while handling all the logistical complexities. The digital marketing campaign had been particularly sophisticated, utilizing Emma's deep understanding of corporate decision-making processes to target the right audiences with precisely crafted messages. The resort's website had been redesigned to showcase the property's capabilities while providing detailed information about services, amenities, and available meeting configurations. The social media strategy had focused on LinkedIn and other professional networks, sharing content that demonstrated the resort's understanding of corporate culture and leadership development. The results of Emma's systematic approach had been remarkable. Within 6 months of implementing her strategic vision, Aspen Ridge Resort had achieved occupancy rates that exceeded industry benchmarks for comparable properties. The client satisfaction scores had been consistently outstanding, with corporate groups repeatedly praising the property's attention to detail and the exceptional quality of their retreat experiences. The financial performance had been equally impressive, with the resort generating revenue levels that justified Emma's substantial investment in property improvements and enhanced services. The combination of premium pricing and high occupancy rates had created a virtuous cycle of profitability that enabled continued investment in the property's development. Emma had proven that her strategic approach to business development could be successfully applied across industries, creating sustainable competitive advantages that generated superior returns. The success of Aspen Ridge Resort had not gone unnoticed in Colorado's business community. Emma had been invited to speak at industry conferences about hospitality management and strategic development, establishing herself as a thought leader in the corporate retreat segment. The recognition had been personally satisfying, but more importantly, it had positioned her as a respected business leader, whose opinions carried weight in professional circles. The networking opportunities that accompanied Emma's growing reputation had been strategically valuable as well. She had developed relationships with corporate executives, event planners, and industry professionals who could provide insight into market trends and competitive developments. The connections had been cultivated carefully, with Emma offering genuine value through her expertise, while building a network that could support her long-term strategic objectives. The most valuable aspect of Emma's expanding professional network had been the access it provided to information about the companies and executives who might eventually become clients. The corporate retreat industry was relatively small and interconnected, with event planners and executives frequently sharing recommendations and experiences. Emma had positioned herself at the center of these conversations, gaining insights into client needs and competitive positioning that informed her strategic decisions. The intelligence gathering had been systematic and sophisticated, with Emma maintaining detailed records of client preferences, industry trends, and competitive activities. She had developed a comprehensive understanding of which companies held annual retreats, when they typically scheduled these events, and what factors influenced their selection of venues. The information had been invaluable for targeting potential clients and positioning Aspen Ridge Resort services to meet their specific needs. The monitoring of Apex Marketing Solutions had been a natural extension of Emma's competitive intelligence activities. The company remained active in Denver's business community, and information about its performance and strategic direction was readily available through industry publications and professional networks. Emma had tracked the company's growth trajectory, client acquisitions, and leadership changes with the same analytical rigor she applied to all her competitive research. The intelligence about Apex had been increasingly concerning from a business perspective, though personally satisfying in its validation of Emma's strategic warnings. The aggressive expansion strategy that Ryan had pursued was creating exactly the kind of operational and financial strains that Emma had predicted. The company's rapid growth was being fueled by dangerous levels of debt, while the acquisition of smaller agencies was creating integration challenges that were affecting client service quality. Marcus Thompson had remained a valuable source of information about Apex's internal dynamics, though their communications had been necessarily discreet given his continued employment at the company. The updates he provided during their infrequent meetings had painted a picture of an organization struggling to maintain its original culture and service standards while pursuing Ryan's vision of rapid expansion. The client retention rates are starting to show the strain, Marcus had confided during one of their coffee meetings in downtown Denver. The acquisitions have brought in new business, but we're losing established clients who are frustrated with the changes in service quality. Ryan keeps saying it's just growing pains, but the problems are getting worse, not better. The information had been both professionally interesting and personally vindicating. Emma's conservative approach to growth and emphasis on operational excellence was being proven correct by Apex's struggles, while Ryan's dismissal of her strategic insights was being demonstrated as a costly mistake. The company they had built together was being damaged by the very approach that had been used to justify her removal from leadership. The most significant intelligence had come through Emma's expanding network of industry contacts. The corporate retreat planning community was small enough that event planners frequently shared experiences and recommendations, and Emma had cultivated relationships with several professionals who worked with Denver area companies. The information they provided about client experiences and industry trends had been valuable for Aspen Ridge Resort's strategic planning, but it had also revealed important details about potential opportunities. The first indication that Apex Marketing Solutions might be interested in booking a retreat at Aspen Ridge Resort had come through Sarah Kim, an event planner who specialized in corporate retreats for mid-sized companies. Sarah had mentioned during a casual conversation that she was researching mountain properties for a Denver marketing agency that was planning their annual leadership retreat. "They're looking for something upscale but not too flashy," Sarah had explained. "The CEO wants to impress his team, but also create an environment that's conducive to strategic planning and team building. They've been growing rapidly and need to address some organizational challenges." Emma had immediately recognized the potential significance of the inquiry. The description of the client's needs matched exactly the kind of services and experiences that Aspen Ridge Resort had been designed to provide. More importantly, the timing and location suggested that the client might be Apex Marketing Solutions, though Sarah had been professionally discreet about identifying the specific company. The inquiry had been confirmed several weeks later, when Emma had received a formal request for proposal from Chelsea Morgan, identified as the VP of Strategic Development at Apex Marketing Solutions. The irony had been immediately apparent. The woman who had replaced Emma in Ryan's professional and personal life was now seeking to book a corporate retreat at the property Emma owned. The proposal request had been comprehensive, outlining Apex's requirements for a 3-day leadership retreat that would accommodate 25 executives and focus on strategic planning and team development. The budget parameters had been generous, reflecting the company's continued financial success despite the operational challenges that Emma's intelligence network had identified. Emma's response to the proposal had been meticulously crafted to demonstrate Aspen Ridge Resort's capabilities while concealing her connection to the client. The presentation had showcased the property's meeting facilities, dining options, and team-building services in a way that would appeal specifically to Apex's stated needs. The pricing had been competitive but not suspiciously low, reflecting the premium positioning that Emma had established for the resort. The proposal had also included detailed information about the retreat facilitation services that Emma had developed, though she had been careful to present these offerings through the resort's professional staff rather than revealing her own involvement. The strategic planning workshops and leadership development sessions had been designed to appeal to companies facing the kind of organizational challenges that Apex was experiencing, though Emma had avoided being too specific about her understanding of their situation. The acceptance of Aspen Ridge Resort's proposal had been both professionally satisfying and personally significant. Emma had successfully positioned her property as the premier choice for Apex's annual retreat, demonstrating the competitive advantages that her strategic approach had created. More importantly, the booking had created the perfect opportunity for Emma to demonstrate to Ryan Patterson exactly what he had lost when he had betrayed her trust and dismissed her contributions. The preparation for Apex's retreat had been intensive and strategic, with Emma working closely with Maria Santos and the resort's staff to ensure every detail would exceed expectations. The conference room configurations had been planned to facilitate both formal presentations and collaborative discussions, with particular attention to creating an environment that would showcase the resort's sophisticated understanding of corporate needs. The dining arrangements had been designed to impress while providing opportunities for informal networking and relationship building. The menu had been carefully curated to reflect both the resort's culinary capabilities and the preferences of sophisticated corporate executives. The service standards had been established to ensure that every interaction would reinforce the impression of exceptional professionalism and attention to detail. The team-building activities had been planned to provide meaningful value, while demonstrating the resort's unique capabilities. Emma had worked with the staff to develop exercises that would address the specific challenges that growing companies like Apex typically faced, including communication breakdowns, leadership alignment, and strategic focus. The activities had been designed to be both engaging and professionally relevant, creating positive associations with the resort's brand. The most important preparation had been psychological and strategic. Emma had spent months anticipating this confrontation, developing the perfect response to the inevitable moment when Ryan would recognize her role at the resort. The woman who had once been devastated by his betrayal was now completely prepared to demonstrate the consequences of underestimating her resilience and determination. The staff briefing had been comprehensive, with Emma ensuring that every team member understood their role in delivering an exceptional client experience. Maria Santos had been particularly well prepared, having worked closely with Emma to understand the strategic importance of this particular booking. The resort's reputation for excellence would be enhanced by the successful execution of this retreat, but Emma's personal satisfaction would come from demonstrating her complete transformation from victim to victor. The arrival of the Apex team had been carefully orchestrated to create maximum impact. Emma had positioned herself to observe the group's check-in process while remaining unobtrusive enough to avoid premature recognition. The sight of Ryan Patterson stepping out of the lead vehicle had created a complex mixture of emotions: satisfaction at how completely the situation had been reversed, anticipation of the confrontation to come, and quiet confidence in her ability to handle whatever challenges might emerge. Chelsea Morgan had been immediately recognizable, her confident demeanor and obvious comfort with Ryan, suggesting that their personal relationship had continued to develop alongside their professional partnership. The woman who had replaced Emma in both contexts was now unknowingly entering the domain of the person she had helped to betray, completely unaware of the strategic disadvantage she had placed herself in. The other members of the Apex leadership team had been mostly unfamiliar to Emma, reflecting the significant changes in personnel that had occurred since her departure. The turnover had been consistent with the intelligence she had gathered about the company's internal challenges, though the executives who had made the trip appeared to be successful professionals who deserved better leadership than they were receiving. The first day of the retreat had proceeded exactly as Emma had planned, with the Apex team experiencing the exceptional service and sophisticated amenities that had made Aspen Ridge Resort famous. The conference facilities had functioned flawlessly, the dining had been outstanding, and the team-building activities had been both engaging and professionally valuable. The client experience had been everything that Emma had promised in her proposal, demonstrating the operational excellence that differentiated her property from competing venues. The strategic planning sessions had been particularly revealing, providing Emma with insights into Apex's current challenges and Ryan's approach to addressing them. The discussions had confirmed many of the concerns that her intelligence network had identified, including client retention issues, integration difficulties with recent acquisitions, and tension between the company's growth ambitions and its operational capabilities. Ryan's leadership style during the retreat had been consistent with Emma's memories of his approach during their partnership, but the context had revealed aspects of his character that had been less apparent when they had worked together. His tendency to dismiss alternative perspectives and his need to dominate strategic discussions had been more pronounced, suggesting that the removal of Emma's moderating influence had allowed his worst instincts to flourish. Chelsea's role in the retreat had been particularly interesting to observe. Her contributions to the strategic discussions had been competent but unoriginal, reflecting the kind of derivative thinking that Emma had always suspected lay beneath her confident exterior. The woman who had been promoted to replace Emma's strategic leadership was clearly intelligent and professional, but she lacked the innovative thinking and analytical depth that had made Emma's contributions so valuable. The most significant moment of the first day had been Ryan's casual dismissal of a strategic concern raised by one of the newer executives. The issue had been legitimate and the executive's analysis had been sound, but Ryan had brushed off the concerns with the kind of condescending authority that Emma remembered from their final months together. The interaction had been a perfect demonstration of how Ryan's leadership style had evolved since gaining complete control of Apex's strategic direction. The evening networking session had provided Emma with the opportunity to observe the Apex team's interpersonal dynamics in a more relaxed setting. The conversations had revealed the kind of organizational tensions that typically emerged when companies grew rapidly without maintaining their original culture and values. The executives had been professional and collegial, but the underlying stress and uncertainty had been apparent to someone with Emma's experience in organizational development. The preparation for the second day had been even more intensive, with Emma working with the resort staff to ensure that every detail would continue to exceed expectations. The morning sessions had been planned to address the specific challenges that had emerged during the previous day's discussions, while the afternoon activities had been designed to provide both recreational value and additional team-building opportunities. The second day had begun with a kind of spectacular mountain sunrise that made Aspen Ridge Resort such a compelling destination for corporate retreats. The natural beauty of the setting had provided the perfect backdrop for the strategic discussions that would determine Apex's future direction, though Emma had been increasingly confident that Ryan's approach would create the kind of opportunities that she had been anticipating. The morning strategic planning session had been particularly revealing, with Ryan announcing his intention to pursue an aggressive acquisition strategy that would double the company's size within 18 months. The plan had been ambitious but poorly conceived, relying on assumptions about market conditions and integration capabilities that Emma's experience had taught her to question. The strategy had been exactly the kind of high-risk approach that had justified her removal from leadership, but it was also the kind of decision that would create significant vulnerabilities for competitors to exploit. The reaction of the Apex executives to Ryan's announcement had been mixed, with some expressing enthusiasm for the growth potential while others had raised concerns about the operational challenges and financial risks. The discussion had been heated at times, with Ryan becoming increasingly defensive when questioned about specific aspects of his strategy. The leadership dynamic had been strikingly different from the collaborative approach that Emma remembered from their early partnership. The afternoon team-building activities had been designed to address some of the communication and leadership challenges that had become apparent during the morning sessions. The exercises had been sophisticated and well executed, providing genuine value while demonstrating the resort's understanding of corporate development needs. The Apex team had responded positively to the activities, with several executives commenting on the quality of the program and the professionalism of the staff. The most significant development had been the growing tension between Ryan and several of his executives over the strategic direction being proposed. The disagreements had been subtle but persistent, with multiple team members expressing concerns about the pace and risk level of the expansion plans. The resistance had been professional and respectful, but it had clearly frustrated Ryan, who had expected unanimous support for his vision. The preparation for the final day had been crucial, with Emma recognizing that the climactic confrontation would likely occur during the closing sessions. The morning had been planned to include final strategic discussions and action planning, providing the perfect opportunity for Emma to make her dramatic appearance and reveal the true ownership of the resort. The third day had begun with the kind of crisp mountain air that made Colorado's resort destinations so appealing to corporate groups. The Apex team had seemed more relaxed and collegial than they had during the previous days, suggesting that the retreat had been successful in achieving its team-building objectives despite the strategic disagreements that had emerged. The final strategic planning session had been scheduled for the main conference room, with the entire leadership team participating in discussions about implementation priorities and resource allocation. The session had been designed to conclude with action planning and commitment ceremonies, providing the perfect dramatic setting for Emma's revelation of her role at the resort. The moment had arrived when Ryan had announced his intention to conclude the retreat with individual meetings with key team members, followed by a group departure for Denver. The logistics had been exactly as Emma had anticipated, creating the perfect opportunity for her to demonstrate that the woman he had abandoned was now in complete control of the situation. The preparation of the burgundy blazer with the Aspen Ridge Resort logo had been Emma's final strategic decision, providing a visual symbol of the complete reversal of power that was about to be revealed. The garment had been chosen not just for its professional appearance, but for its symbolic value, representing Emma's transformation from abandoned victim to successful property owner. The walk from her office to the main conference room had been the culmination of 18 months of strategic planning and systematic execution. Emma had built a successful business, developed a network of professional relationships, and positioned herself perfectly for this moment of complete vindication. The woman who had once been stranded at this very resort was now returning as its owner, prepared to demonstrate to Ryan Patterson exactly what he had lost when he had chosen to betray her trust. The sound of her heels on the polished wood floors had been rhythmic and determined, matching the steady confidence that had carried her through the months of preparation and transformation. The woman approaching the conference room was not the same person who had been dismissed and abandoned by Ryan Patterson. Emma Martinez had evolved into something far more powerful and dangerous than her former partner had ever imagined possible. The handle of the conference room door had been cool under her fingers, a physical reminder of the moment that would complete her transformation from victim to victor. Beyond that door waited the man who had betrayed her trust and the woman who had replaced her, both completely unaware that they were about to discover the true cost of underestimating Emma Martinez. The deep breath she had taken before opening the door had been filled with the satisfaction of perfect preparation and the anticipation of complete vindication. The woman who had once been stranded at this resort was about to demonstrate that she was anything but helpless, anything but defeated, and anything but irrelevant to the future of business success. The conference room had been exactly as she had planned, with the Apex leadership team seated around the rustic pine table and Ryan standing at the head of the room, completely comfortable in his assumed position of authority. The scene had been perfect for the dramatic revelation that would shatter his confidence and demonstrate the complete reversal of their positions. Emma's hand had pushed open the door with the calm certainty of someone who had spent months preparing for this exact moment. The woman who had once been abandoned and dismissed was about to reclaim her power in the most dramatic and satisfying way possible. The conference room fell silent as Emma stepped through the doorway, her burgundy blazer with the Aspen Ridge Resort logo catching the afternoon light that streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Ryan's confident presentation about quarterly projections and expansion timelines came to an abrupt halt as his eyes focused on the woman he had left stranded at this very location just hours earlier. The transformation in his expression was immediate and unmistakable. The self-assured executive who had been outlining his vision for Apex Marketing Solutions' aggressive growth strategy suddenly looked like a man who had encountered something impossible. His mouth opened slightly, then closed again as he struggled to process what he was seeing. "Ladies and gentlemen," Emma said, her voice carrying the calm authority that had made her presentation so effective during her years at Apex, "I apologize for the interruption. I'm Emma Martinez, and I wanted to personally welcome you to Aspen Ridge Resort." The introduction hung in the air like a challenge. Several of the executives around the table glanced between Emma and Ryan, clearly sensing the tension but unable to understand its source. Chelsea Morgan's perfectly manicured fingers tightened around her coffee cup as she studied Emma with the calculating gaze of someone trying to assess a potential threat. Marcus Thompson was the first to break the silence, his voice carrying a mixture of surprise and something that might have been relief. "Emma, what are you doing here?" "I'm here because this is my resort," Emma replied, allowing the words to settle over the room like a revelation. "I own Aspen Ridge Resort. I've owned it for the past 6 months." The impact of her statement rippled through the conference room with devastating efficiency. Ryan's face went through a series of rapid changes: confusion, disbelief, recognition, and finally, a dawning horror as the implications became clear. The woman he had dismissed as irrelevant to the business world was standing in front of him wearing the uniform of the property where he had chosen to humiliate her. "That's impossible," Chelsea said, her voice sharp with disbelief. "You work in marketing, not hospitality. You don't have the resources or experience to own a property like this." Emma's smile was serene and utterly confident. "Actually, Ms. Morgan, I worked in marketing. Past tense." The non-compete agreement that Ryan insisted upon gave me 18 months to develop new expertise and explore different industries. I used that time to study investment strategies, analyze market opportunities, and build the financial resources necessary to acquire this property. The explanation was delivered with the kind of precise clarity that had once made Emma's strategic presentations so compelling. She had anticipated this moment of disbelief and prepared for it with the same analytical rigor she had once applied to campaign development at Apex. Ryan finally found his voice, though it came out strained and barely controlled. "Emma, what is this? Some kind of elaborate revenge scheme? You orchestrated this entire situation just to embarrass me in front of my team?" "Revenge?" Emma appeared to consider the word carefully. "No, Ryan. This is business. You taught me that everything is business, remember? When you ended our partnership, when you restructured my role, when you left me stranded here this afternoon, you assured me it was all just business." She moved further into the room, her presence commanding attention in a way that made Ryan's authority seem suddenly diminished. The executives around the table were watching the interaction with fascination, clearly recognizing that they were witnessing something significant, but not yet understanding its full implications. "I built a successful hospitality business using the same strategic thinking that made Apex profitable," Emma continued, her voice never losing its professional composure. "The same analytical frameworks that you dismissed as overly cautious have generated exceptional returns in the resort industry. Aspen Ridge Resort is now one of Colorado's premier corporate retreat destinations, with occupancy rates and client satisfaction scores that exceed industry benchmarks." The business language was deliberate, forcing Ryan to confront her success on professional terms rather than personal ones. Emma had learned from their final conversations at Apex that emotional appeals were useless with someone who had chosen to view their relationship as merely transactional. "You can't be serious," Ryan said, his voice carrying the kind of desperate authority that people use when they feel control slipping away. "You don't just wake up one day and decide to buy a resort. The financing alone would be impossible for someone in your position." "My position?" Emma's eyebrows raised slightly. "You mean my position as someone who co-founded a successful marketing agency and received a significant buyout of my equity stake? Or my position as someone who spent 18 months studying investment strategies and developing relationships with experienced hospitality investors?" The questions were designed to force Ryan to acknowledge the resources and capabilities he had consistently underestimated. Emma had prepared for this confrontation by anticipating every possible challenge to her credibility and developing responses that would demonstrate the depth of her transformation. "I partnered with Robert Chen, a veteran resort investor who was impressed by my strategic analysis and operational vision," Emma continued. "The acquisition was financed through a combination of my personal investment, traditional commercial lending, and Robert's capital contribution. The due diligence process took 4 months and included comprehensive financial analysis, market research, and operational assessment. The detailed explanation was having its intended effect. The executives around the table were beginning to understand that Emma's ownership of the resort was not a fantasy or a desperate gambit, but a legitimate business achievement that required sophisticated planning and execution. Jennifer Luo, one of the few executives who had known Emma during her time at Apex, spoke up with obvious admiration. "Emma, this is incredible. You've built something amazing here. The facilities, the service, the attention to detail. It's all exceptional." "Thank you, Jennifer," Emma replied warmly. "I'm glad you've enjoyed your stay. Creating exceptional client experiences has been my primary focus since acquiring the property. I believe that sustainable success comes from delivering genuine value, rather than pursuing growth for its own sake." The comment was a subtle but unmistakable criticism of Ryan's expansion strategy, delivered with the kind of professional courtesy that made it impossible to challenge directly. Emma had learned to use precision and understatement to make her points more effectively than emotional confrontation ever could. Ryan's face was flushed with a combination of anger and humiliation. "Fine, so you bought a resort. Congratulations. But that doesn't change the fact that you deliberately arranged this situation to create a scene. You knew Apex would be here, and you planned this whole confrontation. Actually, Emma said, her voice carrying a note of gentle correction. I had no advance knowledge that Apex would be booking a retreat here. The inquiry came through our normal reservation process, and I accepted it because it represented good business for the resort. I only learned about your involvement when I reviewed the guest list yesterday. The lie was seamless and impossible to verify, designed to make Ryan appear paranoid while positioning Emma as a professional who had simply been doing her job. The truth was that Emma had been monitoring Apex's activities and had anticipated the possibility of exactly this type of encounter, but admitting that would undermine the image of casual competence she was projecting. However, Emma continued, I will admit that once I learned about your visit, I was curious to see how you would handle the situation, particularly after your decision to abandon me here this afternoon. The reference to the abandonment sent a visible shock through the room. Several executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats as they realized that their CEO had deliberately left a woman stranded at a remote mountain resort. The behavior was so obviously inappropriate that it cast doubt on Ryan's judgment and character. Marcus Thompson's expression had grown increasingly troubled as he processed the implications of what he was learning. Ryan, you left Emma here without transportation? Why would you do that? It was a logistical decision, Ryan replied, his voice defensive. There wasn't enough room in the shuttle for everyone, and Emma said she could handle her own transportation back to Denver. I said no such thing, Emma corrected calmly. You announced that there wasn't room for me in the shuttle and that I would need to make alternative arrangements. I accepted the situation because arguing would have been pointless and unprofessional. The distinction was crucial, and Emma delivered it with the kind of matter-of-fact precision that made Ryan's version of events seem like a deliberate mischaracterization. The executives around the table were beginning to understand that their CEO had not only abandoned a woman at a remote location, but had then lied about her response to the situation. Chelsea Morgan had been listening to the exchange with growing alarm, clearly recognizing that the situation was reflecting poorly on both her and Ryan. Her attempt to intervene was predictably self-serving and tone-deaf. I'm sure there was just a misunderstanding about the transportation arrangements, she said, her voice carrying the kind of forced brightness that people use when trying to minimize uncomfortable situations. The important thing is that Emma obviously worked everything out. She's clearly doing well for herself. Yes, Emma agreed. I am doing well. Thank you for noticing. The response was polite, but carried an undertone that made Chelsea's condescension obvious to everyone in the room. Emma had learned to use her opponent's own words against them, turning their attempts at dismissal into evidence of their own inadequacy. Ryan seemed to realize that the situation was spiraling beyond his control. His attempt to reassert authority was clumsy and desperate, revealing the insecurity beneath his confident exterior. Look, this is all very interesting, he said, his voice carrying forced casualness, but we need to get back to Denver. Emma, I'm sure you have resort business to attend to, and we have a company to run. Actually, Emma said, I do have some resort business to discuss. Specifically, your account with Aspen Ridge Resort. The statement caused a moment of confused silence. Ryan's expression shifted from dismissal to wariness as he tried to understand what Emma was implying. Our account? He repeated. What about it? Well, Emma said, consulting a tablet that she had been carrying. According to our records, Apex Marketing Solutions has an outstanding balance of $47,000 for this retreat. The charges include accommodations, meals, meeting facilities, and the specialized team-building services that we provided. The amount was substantial, but not unreasonable for a 3-day corporate retreat at a luxury property. What made it significant was the context. Ryan had just discovered that the bill for his company's retreat would be paid to the woman he had betrayed and abandoned. The payment terms are net 30, Emma continued conversationally, though we do offer a discount for immediate payment. I'm sure Chelsea can handle the details with our accounting department. The casual delegation of the payment responsibility to Chelsea was a masterful touch, forcing the woman who had replaced Emma to handle the financial transaction that would benefit her predecessor. The symbolism was unmistakable. Chelsea would be literally paying Emma for services rendered. Ryan's face had gone pale as he processed the implications. You can't be serious. You're gonna charge us for this? Ryan, Emma said with apparent surprise. Of course I'm going to charge you. This is a business transaction. You booked a corporate retreat, we provided exceptional service, and now payment is due. Surely you understand how business works. The echo of his own words from their previous confrontations was deliberate and devastating. Emma was using Ryan's own philosophy against him, demonstrating that she had learned to think in purely transactional terms when it served her interests. Besides, Emma added, I think you'll find that the value we provided was exceptional. Your team has experienced world-class facilities, gourmet cuisine, and professional development services that are simply not available at other properties. The ROI on this investment will be substantial. The business language was designed to make any objection to the charges seem unprofessional and inappropriate. Emma had positioned herself as a competent service provider who had delivered exactly what was promised, making Ryan's shock appear irrational and immature. Jennifer Liu's voice cut through the tension with obvious admiration. Emma, you've built something truly impressive here. The strategic thinking behind this property's positioning is remarkable. You've identified a clear market opportunity and executed a comprehensive plan to capitalize on it. Thank you, Jennifer, Emma replied warmly. I appreciate your recognition of the strategic work that went into this transformation. Building a successful business requires the same analytical rigor and operational focus that made our marketing campaigns effective, just applied to a different industry. The compliment was graciously received, but it also served to highlight the contrast between Emma's thoughtful approach to business development and Ryan's increasingly desperate attempts to maintain control of the situation. The final devastating blow came when Emma addressed the broader implications of the encounter. I hope this experience has been valuable for all of you, she said, her gaze sweeping the room to include every member of the Apex team. Sometimes the most important lessons come from unexpected sources. She paused, allowing her words to settle before continuing. Ryan, I want you to know that I hold no personal animosity toward you. Our partnership ran its course, and you made the decisions that you felt were best for Apex and for yourself. I've made my own decisions about how to move forward, and I think the results speak for themselves. The magnanimous tone was perhaps the most devastating aspect of Emma's entire presentation. She was demonstrating that she had moved beyond the need for revenge or validation from Ryan, achieving a level of success and personal satisfaction that made his opinions irrelevant. I wish you and your team continued success, Emma concluded, and I hope you'll consider Aspen Ridge Resort for your future corporate retreat needs. We pride ourselves on delivering exceptional experiences that exceed our clients' expectations. The professional conclusion was perfect, treating the encounter as a business interaction rather than a personal confrontation. Emma had demonstrated her success, highlighted Ryan's poor judgment, and positioned herself as the victor without appearing vindictive or unprofessional. Ryan's response was predictably weak and defensive. Emma, we appreciate your hospitality. The facilities are impressive, and the service has been excellent. Thank you. Emma replied simply. That means a great deal coming from someone with your experience in client relations. The compliment was polite but carried an undertone that acknowledged Ryan's professional capabilities, while implying that his personal judgment was questionable. Emma had learned to use praise as a weapon, making her opponents feel simultaneously valued and diminished. The aftermath of the confrontation was swift and decisive. The Apex team gathered their materials and prepared to depart, with several executives making a point of personally thanking Emma for the exceptional retreat experience. The contrast between their professional courtesy and Ryan's obvious discomfort was stark and telling. Marcus Thompson lingered after the others had left, his expression reflecting a complex mixture of admiration and regret. Emma, this is incredible. You've accomplished something remarkable here. I'm sorry about everything that happened at Apex. You deserved better than that. Thank you, Marcus, Emma replied genuinely. I appreciate your support, both then and now. I hope things improve for you at Apex. The exchange was brief but meaningful, acknowledging their shared history while recognizing that their paths had diverged. Emma bore no ill will toward the colleagues who had been caught in the middle of her conflict with Ryan, understanding that their options had been limited by circumstances beyond their control. Chelsea Morgan's departure was awkward and stilted, her usual confidence replaced by obvious uncertainty about how to process what had occurred. The woman who had replaced Emma in Ryan's professional and personal life was leaving the domain of the person she had helped to displace, clearly struggling to understand how the power dynamic had shifted so completely. Ryan's exit was the most satisfying moment of the entire encounter. The man who had arrived at Aspen Ridge Resort as the confident CEO of a successful marketing agency was leaving as someone who had been thoroughly outmaneuvered by the woman he had dismissed as irrelevant. His final glance at Emma was filled with something that might have been respect, though it was too late to matter. As the Apex team loaded their vehicles and prepared for the drive back to Denver, Emma stood on the resort's deck, watching their departure with a sense of complete satisfaction. The confrontation had exceeded her expectations, providing not just personal vindication, but professional validation of the strategic approach that had made her transformation possible. The months that followed confirmed Emma's success in ways that even she had not anticipated. Word of the dramatic encounter spread through Denver's business community, though the details were often embellished or distorted in the retelling. The story of the betrayed co-founder who had reinvented herself as a successful resort owner became a legend in local professional circles. The publicity, while sometimes uncomfortable, had been beneficial for Aspen Ridge Resort's business. Corporate clients were intrigued by the property's dramatic backstory and impressed by the strategic thinking that had made the transformation possible. Emma's reputation as a sophisticated business leader who had successfully navigated a major career transition made her a sought-after speaker and consultant. Apex Marketing Solutions continued to struggle with the aggressive expansion strategy that Ryan had pursued. The operational challenges and financial strains that Emma had predicted gradually became apparent to clients and industry observers. Several key accounts were lost to competitors who offered more stable service relationships, while the debt load from rapid acquisition created cash flow problems that forced painful restructuring decisions. Emma's victory was complete, not just in terms of personal satisfaction, but in the validation of her strategic approach to business development. The conservative, analytical methodology that Ryan had dismissed as overly cautious had proven to be the foundation for sustainable success, while his high-risk expansion strategy had created exactly the vulnerabilities that Emma had warned against. The woman who had once been stranded at Aspen Ridge Resort had not only survived the betrayal that had threatened to destroy her career, but had transformed it into the catalyst for her greatest professional achievement. The skills and insights that had made Apex Marketing Solutions successful were hers, and she had proven that they could be applied to create value in any industry that rewarded strategic thinking and operational excellence. Emma Martinez had achieved something far more significant than revenge against the man who had betrayed her. She had built a new identity that was entirely independent of her past relationships, and had demonstrated that her worth was not determined by anyone else's assessment of her capabilities. The woman who had once defined herself in partnership with Ryan Patterson had emerged as someone whose success needed no external validation. The transformation was complete, and the future was entirely her own to shape. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.